Tonight we have Eric Hayes, Tori Brindis, and Brian Johnson to talk show design and choosing music. So I think just to jump right in, we'll start really basic and just when you're in your sort of initial brainstorming phase, where do you go to find songs and to get new ideas? Like, what are your sources? Eric, do you want to start?
Sure. I listen to like an obscene amount of music. um, and honestly, like, especially as I've continued to work in the activity and start working with lots of different groups that do different things and that are good at certain things or stay away from certain things or whatever. You just have to listen to a lot of music. You kind of have to listen to things that maybe you wouldn't always necessarily yourself be into. I think it helps for me that I have kind of a very eclectic and like diverse taste in music already. So, I listen to pretty much everything ish or like some version of everything. So I really just kind of start with music. So whether it's, Apple Music or Spotify for whatever your provider is, or, whether it's searching things on YouTube or whether it's, like listening to older things, or sometimes like me and friends or people that I know will be like, hey, this is a cool song. I don't have a group that can do this, but maybe you do. Or like, I love this. Do you have someone that can do this? Or like, I thought of you. I just listen to a lot of different music. I really try to cross genres, and I really try to pay attention to what the groups I work with, pay attention to what they like or what they're good at or what they are shooting for. And then that's kind of where I start. And like I said, your music providers are your best friends, and don't be afraid to Google things and to, listen to a lot of stuff and ask questions or ask people. If you know someone, if you're looking for a rock song and you don't listen to rock music, maybe like reach out to someone that you know who does. Or, a lot of times people will reach out to me for things like gospel music or, anything like pop, Broadway, that type thing. So I would say that's kind of where I start, and then I build on from there.
For me, I would say similar to that. I actually like to go down the YouTube black hole where you start with an artist or kind of a song that you really, really dig. And then you hit like, if you like this, maybe you'll like this.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, and that's where I find typically the songs that I would have never listened to, because unlike Eric, I probably don't listen to as much of music. But if you go to Pandora and you say, let's go to John Denver Radio, well, that's going to give you a very specific like section of music. Well, okay, no one's listening to John Denver that's doing show choir, but it gives you kind of, it starts to break down, and then you can start following other people that are within that same genre of music, and just kind of follow that black hole. That's one of my favorite things to do, because I typically run into songs that I've never heard of and really, really enjoy. And then it's like, okay, well, this song's not going to quite work, but maybe this next song that is in a similar genre might kind of go that. So if I'm stuck on a particular, I need a changer, and this is the style that I want it, I'll find a song that maybe I've done in the past, or one that, it kind of has a vibe that I want, and then I'll just kind of go down that black hole and see if I can't stumble across something that's got a pretty cool group, or a voice that I really like, or a band that really kind of has that kind of sound, things like that. So
I'm the same. I'm kind of a combo of the two of you. I'm like Eric, and I have music playing all day, every day. I'm team Spotify all the way, and then I kind of sprinkle with YouTube on top of that. I just think Spotify has really awesome features of curated playlists for different reasons. Like Brian, what you were talking about, like with, the vibe or the feel of a number that you want, I'll always check Spotify first.
One, you can use all of the creepy algorithms to do the work for you, right? I found this a couple of times. Like if I have 20 ideas for a show and a playlist, and then I look at the bottom, it will start generating more that are similar to what you have. And I found some pretty good ones in there just by, you know, either they're all songs about one topic or in kind of one genre. Like if it's just ideas for closers, you know, it'll give me more things that sound just like it. Same thing with YouTube. Like I can tell when I've been doing a lot of show planning because all these random songs will just start appearing, you know, in my little suggestion boxes. And it's like finally the creepy technology is useful for something. What do you guys do to organize your ideas? I mean, Ryan, you may not have 100 groups like Tori and Eric, but you have multiple choirs and you have multiple options of, I'm sure, of like, maybe we're going to do this song or this song. Like, how do you sort that all out to remember, you know, when you've listened to 1,000 songs, how do you remember what's in any of them?
I'm an Excel geek, and so I will put things into a sheet and start typically with like, ooh, these songs would be good closers. These songs would be good, yada 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 yada. And once I kind of get those things together, I like, ooh, well, if we do this song as the opener, then we could follow it with this song. But if we do this song here, then we can't use that as a number 4 and so now we got to find something here. But so all of a sudden it becomes like a puzzle that you start taking, where maybe this song you really kind of planned on as your closer now becomes your opener, but now you need to find a new closer. Or, ooh, I really like these 2 songs and they both kind of sound like openers. Well, maybe my prep group can do it. And maybe I'll call Garrett and say, Garrett, can you dummy this down a little bit because my baby group can't do this. And so if there's really a song that I truly, truly like, I'll find a way to make it work, or it goes into that little stockpile of, well, maybe next year. You know, not last year, 2 years ago, Jared and Tori, we had our opener, our closer here, and Jared and Tori came in and choreographed it, and they were like, actually, we think that those 2 should swap. And so a lot of that's just also collaboration and just, being open to new ideas and objective ideas coming in to say, I totally dig that song, but that I think we need to move those around and maybe make them and put them in a different spot for how your show needs to flow.
So where do you start? I mean, is it the chicken or the egg? Do you pick an opener and then build from there? Do you pick another song in the middle? Like how does that all pan out?
It's really strange, and this is maybe not an awesome answer, but I think there's usually like one song that will stick out each year. Like, I want to do this song. And so then you place that in where you think your show would be. And then I go based on that song in this particular spot. Maybe we got a closer. I'll be honest with you, oftentimes it's a ballad. And I know what I want the ballad to be like. Okay, and so now do we decide to choose, a style based on what that ballad is? Or do we choose a theme based on what that ballad is? Or do we not worry about that theme and we just, get some other songs that are really cool that would complement that ballad really well, which is typically what ends up happening. And so I usually start my show design with a single song, and we're really confident with this song, and then I build things around that, kind of like a basketball team gets that one player and then builds the team around that player to how it would complement that. I think that's kind of similar how I prefer to style a show.
I agree. I feel like you back yourself into a corner if you're looking for that one perfect opener or perfect closer. Yeah, and then if you don't find it, you're kind of screwed. So like I think being more open and something finding you, whether it's a theme or an idea or one song that kind of starts all of your wheels turning. Otherwise, I get way too stressed if I'm trying to make the rest of my show work to fit this one song that I really want to do. It's better to just cut your loss and to you.
So, but what if you know, like, okay, this is going to be a story show or this is going to be a theme show and I need something to hit, this particular lyric idea, this particular beat. Like, how does that change the process for you?
I think you have to know like I think when you're doing shows that require a lot more thoughtfulness and consideration when it comes to like story or theme, you have to know that from the very beginning. I think one of the biggest like not necessarily misconceptions or maybe mistakes actually is when people are doing these heavily themed shows or even like these story driven shows is that they don't have all the pieces worked out beforehand. And so then it becomes like, oh, you're just trying to piecemeal things together. I think if you're doing anything that's heavily thematic or heavily story driven, you need to have that theme fleshed out beforehand. You need to have that story fleshed out beforehand so that you're not kind of grasping at straws trying to pick like random things. Like know exactly where you want your show to start, what is the middle, where is like the change or the resolution or the change in the show, and then what's the resolution or what's the end. I think once you establish what that is better, then you can actually make a more pointed decision on which music or what titles are going to work for your show. If you're going into like a heavy theme show and you have not worked out all the particulars, including like even costuming and stuff like that, you cannot, I just think it's really hard to make really sound decisions on titles and song selection when you don't have kind of the schematics, when you don't have like the scaffolding set up. It's like, what are you even doing? You're just kind of like throwing things in the dumpster, but like nothing's gonna like come together. I don't know. I think Tori probably has a good opinion on that too. I just think you have to be really clear on what your objectives are when you're doing shows like that.
Yeah, I think if you pretty much have it and there's like one song that almost works, but something's a little off, change the lyrics as much
Yeah,
as you can to fit your story. Like if you love the song and it like fits perfectly, you love the feel, it's the right tempo and like it totally fits within your parameters, but something is off, change the words.
change the
Make it
words.
work.
It makes you have to be a lot more creative and it takes a little bit more work, but ultimately it's better for your show. If you're doing anything that's like super themed or very story driven, or there's kind of a interweaved plot in your show or something like that, you just have to it just requires kind of a different level of creativity, I think, and you kind of just have to go the extra mile in order to make it work and for it to be successful. Otherwise, it just kind of feels like you just decided not to take the extra 4 steps, and then it's like, that's a letdown.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have a different take on that because I feel like the thing that's really clever about the story shows is how the lyrics fit perfectly, especially when it's songs we know. So if somebody's changing the words, it's like, well, why didn't you just write a song? You know what I mean? It's like, and I guess that's an option too. You could just write a song if you're missing a piece. You could use some original music to fill it in. Um, let's just take a step back for the people that are watching that are new to competitive show choir. It's different from concert choir and other contest activities where you have sort of very standardized lists of like, these are the kinds of songs you need to do and here's how long it needs to be. I mean, there's a lot more structure in those kinds of things. So if you're totally new to show choir coming in, like what are the things that you have to have in your show, regardless of if it's a story or a theme or whatever?
I think you need things that your kids can sing and dance well. I think that's really important. Material that's accessible to them is really important because if you can't teach it effectively and they can't perform it effectively, it kind of is just like you're backfiring the whole year. It's like the you know I'm all for exposing students to new styles and new things, but you have to give them something that they actually can do that makes them feel successful and makes them feel like that you made informed choices about what their current level is, things that are going to challenge them, but also something that they feel like they can do well. I think that's really, really important. And things that sing well, things that dance well, that are engaging for them to learn and perform. I think that's just the simple basic stuff. Like pick fun music, pick stuff that they'll like, but also stuff that you feel good about. I can teach you this and we can learn something new, and I can maybe expose you to a new style or a new artist or a new writer that you've never heard of. I don't know, those are really simple things, I think, kind of base level things, but if it's a younger group or somebody newer, I think those are really important.
I would say variety. Your show has got to have variety. That's I
Yeah.
think the number one comment as a director that I get from a majority of people when I'm out competing is what they really appreciate is the variety within a show. Conversely, if you don't have enough variety, it's glaringly stark because your show falls flat. And so you have to start with that variety. Variety, number one. Number two, it's got to be stuff that you believe in. It's got to be something that you're going to be okay with. If you are, I'll give you a for instance. I don't know that you'll ever see me do a dark show. I can't. I struggle personally. I don't know if I could live in that headspace for an entire school year about how to do a dark show, because that's not my personality. That's not who I am. And when you are talking about trying to bring something to the table for your students, you've got to be able to believe in that and sell it and really go after that every single day. So in addition to the variety that your show has got to have in order to be, to be able to sell to an audience and give them an affective experience, it's super important that you yourself can get behind what it is that you're putting out there. So for me, it's got to have lyrics that are a lot of fun. You got to have maybe a little bit of edge in some of your songs to, really allow your kids to get out there and rock. Similarly, you've got to be able to have something that you can believe in. Lyrics in a ballad, I think, you've got to have a ballad that's really going to, that you're not only going to be able to sell to your kids, but they're going to be able to buy in. And so, especially if you're brand new to this or starting out or trying to learn how to take another step, find something that you believe in, because if you believe in it, you're going to be able to better give that experience to your kids and get them to believe in it, which is then going to pay off, because then your audiences and judges, hopefully will get on board in that train in the middle of your show. There's nothing harder than you get halfway through a season, you're like, oh, I'm so over this piece. I'm done. We should, just do something new. And so it's got to be something that you personally, can invest your time in.
So how do you know in August if you've picked a song that's going to, like, how do you know if you found something that you're going to be able to stand for the whole year?
You got to know your kids. A lot of this, it's funny you ask that, because a lot of this is just, experience. I can tell you pretty quickly, whether or not a song is going to be a successful song for our kids. What they're like, what they dig, hopefully what your kids are going to get into. If you're starting at a new school and you don't know those things, then you pick things that are either tried and true, or you pick things that, again, I think have a good message that you can talk about much beyond just, hey, you got to sing this and dance this really well. You got to perform it. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, okay, what are the words? What are the words about? Why did the writer write this? What was the situation that he or she in that caused them to write the lyrics to this piece? And is that something that, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids can say, hey, I'm going to be able to get behind that and sell that to somebody else, because I can make that song fit into who I am. So in answer to your question, some of that's, you got to know your kids, and you've got to be comfortable with the message that you're trying to sell to your kids. So
I definitely think that's more of a director thing than a choreographer thing too, because like as a choreographer, like even if you're working in August, like especially if you're working heavily, like if you work with multiple groups or whatever, you do that song in like 1 day or 2 days, like maybe, like, and then you're done with it. So it's less of a thing for the choreographers, because we have to kind of like flush and throw away more than directors do. We don't necessarily have to live with it as much. So like we can just go in there and like do whatever we want to do with the choreo, and and make it work, and like make sure it's blocked and it looks great and that the director is happy, but we don't have to keep teaching it all year. So definitely, I think Brian said some really great things, because as choreographers, we get, the luxury of just having to create and teach and like work with the kids, but we don't have to be there every day, to you know, to do the ins and outs of every single piece of the show. So yeah.
They nailed it.
So it kind of feels like we're jumping around this idea of like the brand of the choir almost, right? Like, and I think you see that in a lot of groups, like they don't necessarily follow a formula, but they're doing similar kinds of music or similar kinds of messages. So how do you, I guess, how do you emphasize that or pick songs that fit your brand or the group's brand? How do you do that without getting stuck into just doing the same old thing every year? Tori?
I think I love that you said that. I am someone who believes heavily in like the first thing you should do if you're starting a show choir is decide what your brand is going to be. Like, what type of group do you want to be? What types of lessons do you want your show to teach these kids? How do you want your group to appear to the community when you go out and represent your school? Like, that is one of the most important things to me. And Brian and I talk about that all the time because when we started working together, that was one of the first things was like, what is our brand? And then how can we find music that fits it? And I think like pick some adjective describing words of like what your brand is, whether it's uplifting, um, rock and roll, like a little bit edgy, but super fun and free. And then find music that makes you feel that way when you listen to it. And usually that's like a happy marriage of the two.
I think Garrett also touched on this a little bit. I think, though, it's easy to fall into the trap of, well, this is going to be our formula. And I heard a friend of mine on a webinar, excuse me, talk about the fact that at some point, though, you also have to allow yourself the permission to do something that maybe is a little out of your comfort zone. Because if you don't ever push yourself, then you're not really going to be able to grow. And I'm not saying change an entire show, but maybe if you're not really comfortable with musical theater, that for 1 year you talk to your choreographers and say, hey, I'd like to try a little bit of something. Let's see if we can do this because I'm not really comfortable with it, but I need to expand my abilities a little bit and my horizons, and I want my kids to be able to experience X. So in order to do that, I'm going to have to pick a song that is a little bit out of that box. And I think that it's okay to allow yourself to try something that does push you. Maybe you try it with a prep group. Maybe you try it with a group that can't that doesn't have so much at stake. You try it once and then you say, okay, well, that worked out actually okay. Now I'm going to try it with my comp group or my varsity group another time. Maybe you try it with that varsity group because they're the ones that can maybe handle that change a little bit easier. So as much as I believe in sticking with what you're comfortable with and what you're good with and what your brand is, I think it's also important that occasionally you step outside of your own box of comfort to continue to allow yourself to grow and challenge your own thinking and your own students into growing as a director.
Yeah, Brandon formula is the finest line.
Well, so I had a professor in college. He talked, it was for a songwriting class, but he talked about the golden brick rule. You know, like if you had a brick wall and then, you know, it's made out of red bricks and there's one gold brick in, like, what are you going to look at? But if you have a whole wall that's built out of gold bricks, like you're not going to notice anything special about it because it all looks the same. So like the point was, you know, pick one unique thing to throw in there or two unique things. Don't try to like revamp the whole, like don't try to reinvent songwriting in one piece of music, you know, just like throw in one idea here, another one there, and just kind of give it something unique.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that comes too, like from the kids, right? Like sometimes you have kids that are especially talented in one thing or another. And so a lot of the time when I'm choosing songs for my groups, I'm trying to play to their strengths, you know? Like, oh, and you've got a really great belter this year. Okay, we'll find something for them to belt, you know? Or you've got a really good musical theater person. Or I think a lot of times people overlook the band as part of this, you know? Like, oh, if you've got an amazing rock guitarist, like you need to program some rock music. And if you don't have that, then don't program rock music, you know? Like
Sure.
that's my biggest pet peeve is when people choose music that their band just cannot stylistically pull off. It's like, well, this is never going to work. Like
It kind of ruins it.
no matter how great your choral students are, like if your band can't do this, then it's not going to work.
Well, I think that's important for every piece of the show too. Like, I really like what Brian talked about and Tori talked about with like branding your group and understanding like what what you want to present. But also, there's nothing wrong with expounding smartly on what your kids are good at, are capable of. But again, smartly, I think is the operative word there. Don't do things that you feel like they won't feel confident doing. I think that's so important because you can, like, even as a choreographer, we can sense that from a group. And even more as like a judge, you can automatically sense it when it's like not fit or something about it is just not really clicking. So definitely be really in tune with what the brand and like what the overall feel and style or whatever the word you use to describe your group. And don't be afraid to expound on it, but also be smart about it and be very considerate and thoughtful about, yes, I want to try this, but is this, is it going to highlight my kids in the way I want? Can my band play this? Are my choreographers good at this? Are, do I have the personnel on all levels to make this number or make this song or whatever really solid, as opposed to, I just like the song and I want to do it. Well, okay. So yeah, I just feel like you need to, as much as like it's about the director and the kids, also it's about the band and the choreographer and all those things. Everybody on the team kind of needs to play their part when it comes to that, trying new things or adding that variety that Brian talked about.
I would also add to that I think it's really important that that there's a collaboration between yourself and your choreographers.
For sure.
Early in my career, I made the mistake of saying, "This is the show I want. This is the choreographer that I'm going to get. Now go and make magic happen." And if you have someone who is amazing at musical theater but maybe isn't the best at pop, well, for you to do a rock and roll show is not going to do what's best for your kids, and so to let them, number one, have input for buy-in, I think is super important, but also knowing what their strengths are and what they kind of feel like they want to add to your ensembles, and good choreographers are going to want to collaborate with you and feel like they are part of that creative process to allow what is going to come best from not only our kids and our band, but also from them to accentuate the product that is being put out there.
So I want to hear from the choreographer side of things, and I think this would be helpful for people to know. Like, what does your planning and your prep look like when you get a song and you're listening to it? Like what are you listening for? Like, what are the things that stand out to you as like, okay, this is going to be a visual moment, or I'm going to do something here, like what are the things you're listening for, and how are you sort of deciding like what kind of choreo a song is going to get? Because I think that's what some directors have a struggle with, that is they pick a song and then they get a totally different kind of choreo than what they were expecting. So like, what are the things that you're listening for as you're planning out a show?
I think it depends, like, there's a couple different ways to do it because some directors like the choreographer's input so much that they will just say, here's the original, make a cut of this the way that you want it laid out, what feels right to you, what is the flow that you like, and then we'll have it arranged. Versus getting a perfectly curated track from you, Garrett, that already feels like it's going to feel when you perform it.
Yeah.
So for me, like if it's already an arrangement that has a demo track, it's extremely easy. Like things immediately just scream like, dance break, the X, Y, and Z, whatever, versus trying to create something out of an original track takes a lot more time.
Yeah, I think I think every kind of group that you probably work with is different slightly in how they prepare or how they get ready to learn, or how they are constructing their show, or how they are you know, writing or designing their stuff. Like Tori said, sometimes we get really great like these like really great curated tracks, and like it kind of just tells you what you need to be doing. And then sometimes some directors are like, hey, which sections of this do you want to do? Or directors will have certain sections that they want. And then they will ask their choreographers, like, which do you want? And you kind of come to an agreement, or, you know, a meeting in the middle or whatever.
What do you prioritize as you're listening? Like, is it the drums? Is it the vocals? Like, what are the most important things that like that you choose to like lock onto? And I'm going to choreograph to that.
I'm
in,
lyrics.
in general, I like music and lyrics for sure. Like, what is the feel of the music, or the accompaniment, or the orchestration is super important to me, because I think that style, I think that helps dictate style a lot, and how you're going to interpret the song choreographically, and then also how you're going to end up teaching it. And also lyrics to play a huge part in that, because that if it's not really interpretive or indicative of the lyrics, it kind of is like this weird disconnect, you know? So I think that's super important. And then also like be conscious of what the style is. Like if it's a Broadway piece, maybe don't, you know, there are certain things or certain steps, or like, you know, visual things you maybe want to get away from. Or if it's like a pop piece, you don't really, or you're not really trying to give me like clean lines and like the like, you know, classical technique or whatever. Or if it's like, you know, some sort of like kind of lyrical piece, you're not trying to do like a crazy, you know, intricate thing on a intricate choreography on lyrical pieces. I think that that takes range from the choreographer to know how things are supposed to feel and look when you get a piece of music, and really being able to interpret what the music is doing as well as the lyrics too.
I'm lyrics all the way.
Yeah.
Lyrics are like the first thing that will drive my movement, and then it's the rhythm of the lyrics or
Yeah.
like drums. Good drums.
I think I think the music I think music is so important, and when I'm like judging, or even when I'm just creating, I think you have to listen to the music. What is the music kind of telling you? I think as a choreographer, the music just when you hear it, it should automatically tell you kind of like you should have a very, even if it's very like entry level, you should know kind of like, okay, this is what this feels like to me, you know. And talk with your director, because y'all might not see it the same. So you need to have a conversation about maybe what they want or what they're expecting or things like that. I think that's something that gets lost. Like, don't just go in without having had like, even if it's a 5 minute combo, like, hey, this is my idea. How do you feel?
Well, and I think one of the reasons we have arrangers is we can do creative things with the music. So I guess when you're listening to a song, like how do you decide, yep, that's perfect the way it is, or I totally want to change this and like make it a different style and make it faster? Like how do you decide to do like a creative version of a song versus like I'm just going to do it basically as is but with a dance break because it's show
Mm-hmm.
choir?
I mean, I've done some of Garrett's charts where they're like completely different from the original, and actually it's challenging, but in a really good way though, because it makes your brain kind of reset and rethink of, and think of some a song, even if like you know the song, it makes you think of it in a completely new way, and you have to approach it that way. Otherwise, you're not really gonna like nail the choreography or nail the composition of what you're creating. So. Um, Sometimes I hear certain things, or like I will even like this has happened before, and I think Tori can probably speak to this too. Like we sometimes we'll be like on YouTube or something, and we hear like some crazy cover of like some girl or guy like singing it in a completely different way, and I'll send it to Garen and be like, "Have you heard this? Like, bro, this is so cool." You know what I mean? So that kind of helps dictate too, because sometimes you hear some crazy covers of things, or you hear someone do it in a different way, or like I've been literally like at a bar or like somewhere with someone singing and being like, "Do you hear this? Like, this is the coolest version of this." And me like either like recording it on my phone, or like trying to remember like how they sang it and explaining it to Garrett, or like explaining like this is like the time period I want this to feel like, you know. So I don't know. It takes some creativity, but like I said, I've done some of Garrett's stuff where it's like a reworked version of something. So I think again, it takes a couple more steps of creativity when you're doing that, but in the end, it really becomes like kind of a cool moment, you know, and it's something that's memorable, I think.
Well, I always Google if there's a live version.
Oh yeah.
Always.
Garrett says that about me all the time. I'm like the live version. I want the instrumental. I want the instrumentation. I want the orchestration. Like if I ever send Garrett anything, it's always a live version.
Well,
I think you should ask Brian because he's actually like one of the most amazing band people I know.
Say, like, isn't he a band director too? So like,
People don't know that about him, but I feel like Brian, you really could speak to that.
In what regard? In regards to how the instrumentals work into that?
Yeah, or just like finding something that you really like and then deciding to maybe change the style of how it originally is to something different.
You know, when it comes to orchestration of a song and how to change it to a different way, while I do enjoy working with the band, I do not have the creative tools, I think, to put that onto paper, and that's where I rely a lot on the arrangers. Now, if the arrangers come to me and say, "Hey, you know, I really want to kind of do this. Do you have an instrumentalist that can handle X, Y, or Z, or this solo thing, or what? You know, or do you have trumpets that can handle this Chicago chart?" You know, things like that. I will absolutely be able to give input on that, and then I can give direction maybe on what direction I want to go with that piece of music. But as far as the actual arranging it to give it a new vibe or a new feel or a new style, like postmodern jukebox kind of thing, I am not that person. That I have to leave into the hands of the arranger to be able to pull that off.
so what are some red flags? What are some things that you just hear it in a track and you go, nope, that song's not going to work? You know, like what are some things to avoid when you're picking songs?
Brian can go first. He's the
Yeah,
director.
I'll start there. I'm probably of the two people that I of the colleague that I work with, I'm probably the more conservative one. And if I hear a lyric that gives just it starts with the lyrics, and if there's a racy lyric, number one, I'll change it. If I really dig the song and I think I can get away with that song, I'll change it. But it's not like I'm doing Fat Bottom Girls, you know, as a closer. As much as that would be fun, or like a number four changer, that would be awesome. But I can't get beyond that. I've got a daughter. She's in seventh grade, and if I can't see her doing that in show choir, I'm not going to make my own students do that, because then I would feel like every dad out in that audience is like, oh my God, what is going on? So number one, it starts there. The lyrics have got to be on. If it if it has material in it, or comes from a place of subject matter that I'm not comfortable putting out there for an audience, that I'm not going to purposefully really attention or light to, I struggle to do with that. I'll give you an example. Linmar in Iowa is an amazing program, and they have tackled some really heady, controversial, maybe just very socially tough subject matter, whether it be like suicide or depression or postpartum or whatever. That I think, though, you've got to have a special like insight and a special really kind of idea on how that needs to go to be able to tackle that. So red flags for me personally is subject matter and lyrics. I will absolutely say no to a song if it doesn't, if I get a little vibe to it, then I can't get on board with it. I just can't. Also, if it's a song that is going to require my girls to bring out a part of them that's just like, nope, that should not be seen on stage, that's another thing that I'll put a kibosh to that real quick.
I don't I mean, Tori kind of knows this. Like me and Tori probably are kind of similar in this way. We probably, I mean, yes, like probably a little bit more like open with that type of thing, but also, I mean, when you're teaching students and when you're teaching, you know, young men and young women, I think it's just super important that you try to highlight them in the best and most positive way. And you wouldn't, I like, even when I'm choreographing, um, you know, like, of course, I want them, you know, I teach them certain ways to do things and like I want it to look a certain way, but I always tell my groups that like I will never put anything on your body that makes me uncomfortable or that I will be like, you know what I mean? Of course, I want to teach them and I want them to learn to be great performers and learn how to be engaging. So I kind of agree with Brian on like the red flags. I mean, like some lyrics can be changed, and then sometimes you're like, this is the whole song. I can't change the whole song, so you just need to like maybe don't do that song. Or you know, like I said, I think like he mentioned just to piggyback off of certain, there are certain like even as a choreographer, I think there are certain kind of themes and tropes and things like that that I don't necessarily want to tackle. When you're a choreographer, you kind of don't always get a choice in it. Like you're kind of like, well, this is what they pick sometimes, and so you just have to do it, and you have to make it good. And unfortunately, that's like the burden, not the burden, but the responsibility that a lot of choreographers bear. But you know, I have gotten less and less away. I definitely agree with Brian on that. I have like little to no interest in doing dark stuff. Like I just don't. And not because um, it's not important or it's not real life, but I think there are so many great things that we can sing and perform about and things like, so those are things that I kind of typically want to stay away from, and not necessarily that they're bad, but I wouldn't call them red flags, but maybe just like red buttons. Like I don't necessarily want to do those types of things. And like Brian said, lyrics and some subject matter, and if I feel like it's gonna make the kids, especially girls and young men or young women, I feel like it's gonna present them in a way that I don't want them to look on stage, then I typically will steer away from that. But also at the same time, I do push a little bit, and I can be definitely probably be a little bit less conservative when it comes to that. But always, I want them to feel confident and and empowered, and not like, oh, I don't know if I should be doing this. So that's kind of my spill on that. What do you think, Tori?
I think my personal red flags are um, subject matter for sure.
Yes.
Like, I would include like cultural insensitivity with that, like with style of music. Like, I've seen so many, this is very specific, but it's just what came to mind. Like, I've seen a lot of shows like trying to do like a Bollywood type
Yeah.
show. But like, if you don't have the right tools to make something like that work, like
Do it.
maybe not the right choice.
Yeah.
That would be one. And then the other one is if something is cheesy or repetitive, I usually don't enjoy it. Like, I don't like gag numbers
Yeah.
personally. Like, those are just things that are hard for high school kids to get behind sometimes. And music that is really repetitive, I find just doesn't really work well in a live setting.
I,
I would add
I,
to that though. I would just add to that that I think if a school's brand, we were talking about branding earlier, if you have a choreographer and like they have a brand that gets away with that goofy kind of stuff, or it gets away with, or that is used to really getting on board with some great theatrical stuff, I think it does sell. But that's again where that conversation between the choreographer and director is important. I would also like to add, I mentioned Linmar, that when they tackled those issues, those shows were stunning.
yeah.
It's just not, it's not where I was comfortable with doing that kind of stuff.
You have to know your team as well as the kids.
Definitely.
And we kind of touched on this with the band. Like, you have to pick music that stylistically fits your band, but the same goes for the singers too. Like, you can look at the range of a song, and like, yes, you can change the key, but if it's going an octave and a half, then at some point, like, that's going to be really rangy and challenging for a lot of them. I also look at the vowels, like, what are the vowels they're going to be holding out a long time? Like, at the ends of phrases, if every line ends in E, then I'm just not going to do the song, because then
there's a choir component to this. There's a choir part to this. Oh, I'll be darned.
I mean,
No, I think Tori said some really interesting things too, just about, like just not necessarily red flags, but just be really smart about your programming and like to understand what you're comfortable with, what your kids will be comfortable with. And sometimes you have to think about the community that you live in as well.
Okay.
That's really important. And like Tori said, like I think cultural and like stylistic competency is so important. Like if you're gonna do these things, that are from different places, that come from different cultures, you need to be very respectful of that because um, it can quickly become appropriation. Like there's such a fine line. And I think having the competency and the consideration when you're programming your stuff is just really, really, really important. And I think we've all probably judged or sat on panels or seen groups where we're like, ooh, like not sure that was the best idea. But that takes again more consideration in the programming and like designing phase. Like make good decisions and honestly, like ask questions. If like you need to talk to people and research and ask the right questions so that you make sure that you're making good decisions for what you're doing with your music and your programming.
so how do you decide how hard to make the show? How do you decide how far you're going to push the kids and in what ways? Like do you specifically talk to choreographers or Jared or do you like Eric and Tori? Do you specifically decide like I'm going to make this harder than I usually would? I mean, how does the difficulty factor into the design?
I think every choreographer, I think Brian's gonna have good comments on this too because he like is in a school every day. I think like in terms of choreographers, and Tori can probably piggyback. After if you've been with your groups for a while, maybe even if it's just like 2 years, you kind of already know what they can handle and you kind of know what you can push and where you need to back off or where you can like try something new or like this is something that I picked up from Tori a lot. Like because we kind of come from similar backgrounds dance wise. If you want to try these like crazy lyrical things or these like crazy technical things, that might not be great for the whole group. But if you have like two or three girls or even like a boy, or even if you have like five kids that look great doing that type of thing, like that's where you put it. You just are be smart about what you decide to program choreographically and how you decide to compose the choreography and create it. But like I said, I think it, after a year with the group, you can tell where you can push and where you can't, and that's just kind of the expertise of being a choreographer. You just kind of have to make smart decisions and hope and try to do your best when it comes to that. And yes, push them when you need to, but also when you know something's going to be a bit of a stretch, you need to recognize that and be considerate of it. Corey, what do you do? Do you think?
Yeah, I think I always am a firm believer of like if you set the expectations high, the kids will
Yeah,
always hit it if you're working with the right people. Like if you have a really good director who pushes their kids in a loving way, like those kids will always succeed if everybody's on board. So I feel like I always try to set the level just like ever so slightly out of their reach because it will push them to continue to keep working hard, but not so far out of their league that they're just going to be a struggle all year.
Yeah, that's difficulty is hard. I find that it's easier to overwrite and then water down as the season goes along than it is to get a watered down arrangement that doesn't really have anywhere to grow. Um, uh, as someone who's not an awesome arranger on the creative side of that, I do trust that the arrangement that comes in will have a good balance of things that are in unison and things that are in parts. Obviously, you can do a lot of difficulty in the ballad. Maybe that's your place to really accentuate the places. But if you know, like in a closer, that it's going to be this rock and closer, 8-part music, unless you have just crazy horses singing, 8-part music probably isn't going to be great when they're already tired trying to come down to the end of their show, and then the choreography is going to be, you know, as such to really be memorable and a closer. You probably don't want to be as thick musically there. So I think you can pick and choose your moments, find some aha moments that, and then again, this can come be a part of a conversation with an arranger or something that's set ahead of time where you say, okay, I want like a vocal thing that is way cool, and then the rest of the stuff needs to complement that one big vocal aha moment that it but is not so challenging, you know, so that you're not spending all of your time trying to really get them to do these crazy things. A group can sound amazing singing 3 and 4 parts. A group can absolutely sound amazing doing that. And so hard for the sake of hard, I can't get on board. There might have been a time when I was younger that I believed that was the case, but as the longer that I've done this, it, like they've said, I mean, it's good to challenge, but just doing hard because, oh, surely we'll get points for this being hard, I don't think that's happening out there. I don't think that's on the ballots right now very often much anymore. The difficulty category, and even if a difficulty category is on there, there are a lot of judges that can't hear difficulty. And if you do something really well that's hard, you're probably not getting the credit for that, because unless they've got a really great ear, then they're not going to know that that was that hard, you know, if you're doing it right. And so hard for the sake of hard, I no longer get behind as much as I can. You can certainly do things with like ending chords going into a dance break that you branch off and make it really full or make it really crunch. And so I think when it comes to difficulty, I think you got to be really smart about picking and choosing your battles and your places in your arrangements that are gonna accentuate your group, so that you can still have that element of difficulty without it being hard. I think that's a really big distinction between those two.
That's kind of like for choreography too.
Yeah, well, and I think that's where the director really like has the most responsibility, is to sort of coordinate all these different people on the creative team. You know, because I've never once had a conversation with a choreographer. It's like, okay, this part's going to be really hard to dance, so make the music easy. I don't know. Maybe we should. Maybe we should start doing that. But you know, like we're not collaborating, like figuring out, like, okay, this part's going to be hard. And, you know, we're just kind of doing what comes to us. And I think it's the director's job to take all of this and then figure out what's the right choice.
If you don't mind, I'll just interject one other thing. Our girls group was a great example this year. This year, we thought our girls were just going to come out smoking, and the music that was arranged for them in some cases was too thick for them. And so mid-season, we just had to kind of start watering down some of that. And I think you can't be afraid as a director to, again, put your kids in the best possible situation to be successful. So if that means, you know, on this section, ladies, you're going to sing this in your belt and you're all going to sing the soprano 2 line because that's where the melody is, and I need you guys all just to rock that so that that sound gets off the stage, well, then you go ahead and you go unison. Now, this year is a little bit different than in a lot of past years, but again, you're not going to be docked too often unless you're doing a whole show in unison, which would be so boring. You know, I mean, don't be afraid to take what the arranger has done. Again, the arranger writes, but is not the one sitting in front of those kids every day. And so you've got to do what's going to be best for your kids as the season continues to morph. Or maybe, you know what, they were singing it great as they were learning the music, but yeah, now that choreography is super hard there, super intricate. So now you make that decision. Do you call your choreographer and say, hey, I need you to re-choreograph this because I really want this vocal moment? Or do you say, okay, that's really cool what they're doing choreographically. Let's dial back those voice parts a little bit in order to, so that that choreographic moment can still exist. But I think as the director, that's where your responsibility needs to come to what's going to be best for my kids. And then you make that decision.
So at what point do you factor costuming into all this? Because it, you know, it relates obviously to how you move, but also to the styles of the songs that you're doing. So as you're picking music, like when do you start thinking about costuming, and how does that, you know, do you ever change songs because you found a really great outfit and you just want it to work? Or like, I don't know, how does that whole process work? I know nothing about clothes.
I don't think I've ever picked a song because I wanted to costume a certain way. I don't think so. Um, I think you should always start with your music, and like that should always be kind of like your music and your choreography should always kind of be kind of like the bread and butter of what you're doing with your show choir. And then, you know, when once you start talking about costuming and apparel and things like that, obviously you want it to accentuate what you're doing, and you don't want it to hinder what you're doing, but also you want it to be like considerate of what the style of the piece is, or considerate of what the story of the show is, or the theme of the show is. You know, um, as right now, I think it's important that people make really smart choices about costuming, because if you are getting into the situation where there are a lot of, especially if you're first starting, maybe you're not getting new costumes or apparel every year. So be really smart about, you know, will this costume, whatever it's going to be for my boys or my girls or my all women's group or whatever, um, will it work for, you know, multiple things, or can I get it to work for next year, or can I use this in a couple of years or something like that. I wouldn't suggest building a show off of a costume, but I mean, I guess it's probably been done in some way. But I do think that the costume, you know, should be informed by what you're singing and dancing about, and it should make your kids look great. And if you have the opportunity to do something amazing costume wise, then go for it. But also, you know, be smart about it and use it in a way that like helps accentuate, you know, the whole thing. You know, like me, Tori does this probably more, and we both kind of do this, but we work with groups that, you know, the costuming is very much a part of the things that they sing and dance about. And so we have to incorporate the costume into the choreography. So that's another layer and another thing of that where, oh, this like, you know, partnering in my gown number. Well, we need to incorporate this gown, or the boys are wearing these jackets that have like these crazy stripes on them. We need to incorporate that. So that becomes more about like a choreographer thing. But I would definitely say always pick things that look great on your kids, that look great on every single kid, that they feel empowered by and that they feel confident in, but also that helps present your show in the best possible way, and that you know, doesn't work against what you're trying to accomplish on stage.
Yeah, I think communicating ahead of time to your creative team
Yes.
is really important. Like, I think choosing music number one, getting arrangements number two, choose your team, pick costuming, and then start. Like, I've had situations where, like, I've choreographed an entire show, and then the director came back and said, "Oh, well, for this opener, they're going to be wearing a floor length gown, and you're
You're
not
like,
gonna see
what?
their feet, you're not going to see their legs," or vice versa, where it's like, you know, you have this hard hitting rock closer, and the girls are going to be in this teeny tiny little dress. Which, like, in both situations, you kind of completely have to rethink what you did. So knowing ahead of time and just like making sure everybody's on the same page, I think is so important.
Don't do crazy. Like don't give us the song. Give us one song and then don't tell us what the costume is. That's like your choreographers gotta know. Like they just gotta know, because there are just certain things you can do in certain garments, and there are other things that you can't or you should stay away from. So it's very helpful to know that in the beginning. Like girls are in dresses, great. Like please let me know. Or girls are in pants, or boys have suits on. You know what I mean? Like just, you know, even if it's very general and basic, just let your choreographers know. I feel like I always ask that question very early on. What are they wearing? That really helps me when I'm creating, for sure.
I don't have anything to add. Tori and Eric wrote on there.
Um, so one more question from me, and then if any of you watching have a question you wanna throw in here, um, I feel like obviously once you put everything together, everything sort of impacts everything, right? You know, and maybe one song on its own, you're like, oh, this is fine as a 3-minute number, but then you hear it together with a bunch of stuff, and then you're like, well, actually, like coming after 4 more songs, this feels a little long now. So I guess is it more of Is it more of just getting into it and figuring that stuff out, or can you plan ahead and know like this needs to be about this length, this needs to be shorter? Like, can you anticipate like some of the pacing things? Because I feel like where a lot of people get in trouble is not necessarily the songs, but just like the pacing of the show.
I think you can anticipate a little bit beforehand and just kind of make a plan, but I think like both Brian and Tori would agree, like when you're in the middle of season and sometimes something is just not working, like or you know you've got to make a change for something, you can't really anticipate that. And some stuff you just don't know until you actually do it and you get it on stage and you have it in front of people. I mean, everybody knows like we always get something we're like, hey, 3 minutes is cool on this, or like I don't need the second verse on this song, or that type of thing. So you can always kind of anticipate, but show choir is kind of one of those things where you don't really know about it until you see it, and you have to be able to see like the full thing of it before you can make really finalized decisions about it. I mean, I love a cut. Like, let's cut it because if it's helping to tighten up the show and it's helping, the pacing, all for it. So that's kind of my thing on it. I mean, have a plan in the beginning, but I do think you need to be very flexible. And if it's not working, you need to be flexible and like make changes all the time.
Yeah, I have never, well, no, I shouldn't say that. Once did I actually change a song mid-year because it wasn't working. But otherwise, I think if you take care of what you need to take care of early on and making sure that it's stuff that's good for your group that you can buy into, I think that takes care of most of the problems that you're going to have down the line. But I do agree with Eric. If it's not working, there's no sense in putting it out there and just trudging through and making everyone miserable because the kids are not dumb. They'll know if something's not working, and especially if they've been to two competitions and they're just getting hammered on, oh my god, I just don't feel you guys getting into that ballot or that style number, and they're like, well, no, duh, because we hate it, and it's and there's no point in continuing to put them out there in a situation where they're miserable, and you can see that from the stage. So at that point you've got to change something, whether it's the song, whether you just omit, whether you put it on in something that maybe worked last year and half the group still knows. I don't know, but you've got to be willing to cut a loss if something's just not jiving. And again, it's for the kids, and you got to make the kids feel like they're rock stars. And if they're not, you as a director have to shoulder that responsibility and being like, okay, ego's got to go out the door, and you got to be like, well, this now has to change.
I think as far as pacing goes, less is more.
This is more, yeah,
Always like just leave everyone wanting more. There's like adding one more chorus or one more dance break sometime. I just don't like short and sweet to
yeah.
keep things moving, keep things exciting. Like I'm always someone who's like cut, cut, cut. Let's keep it short and highlight our best moments so that like we have a lot of good stuff and not a lot of dips within the show.
Well, and you can do that in advance too. Like you can cut up these songs and put them all together. I've actually done that before. You get like this 15-minute track and you just listen to everything and you get a sense of how it's going to flow. I mean, a lot of stuff will change, but like if you're not listening to your songs in order after you pick them, like that's a mistake, I think.
Agreed.
We'll
This
just be
was this was
know your stuff before like ahead of time. Like know your material, know it really well, and just be able to be if it's not working or if you need to cut a chorus or a verse or like whatever, just cut it. If it's gonna make your show better, you should just make those changes. Like Brian said, like that ego kind of has to go away. Like you just kind of have to do it.
this was life changing to me. Marching band director told me this, or not a clinician who said, when I'm doing and I'm designing for my marching bands, if I look at my watch, I know there's a problem. And she'll say, when I'm watching my own group do their show, if I at any point look at my watch, then I've got to change something in my show. Something about that pacing is not right, because me, someone who is invested, was bored enough with that moment that I needed to look at my watch. And so that was life changing for me, and I've used that in so many different things in regards to show choir. So
Any questions from people in the audience? In the little black bar on top of the screen?
Sure, I have a question. All right. Just thinking about, as we talk about knowing your group and knowing your competitions and your area and what you're going to and whatever else. You guys are in different areas. I'm in Wisconsin. So what's the formula that, like we talked about, the formula that you have for your group, but, like for picking the styles of songs, what type of setup do you use? I mean, like the opener, the closer, the ballad, the costume changer, the whatever else, and you get everyone else who all of a sudden comes with this totally different flavor, and it's like that's the best thing. Like, hey, when Illinois groups come up here to Wisconsin, it's like we lost. So just because it's a different formula that people see. So thoughts on that?
Who wants to go first, Brian?
I'll go. I'll be honest with you. The style that the style or the formula that works really well for what we're doing is opener, style change, or just a change of pace, but not necessarily. It could be the same style, but just something that's a little bit different. Go into a ballad, you have a changer, and then a closer that just rocks. But what I've learned mostly within that formula kind of touches on the pacing thing. You can have a verse, refrain, dance break, refrain, and end it, and so I think the pacing of how that kind of goes, I think, is what makes the formula continue to work, because at no point is someone bored at the show, because even though I've got a relative formula that works, and I'll be honest with you, Tori can attest to this with working with our groups, that each of our groups has that same exact formula for the most part, but it works because there is a conducive collaboration between Garrett writing the charts and Tori and Jared doing the choreography and us kind of planning it out ahead of time. And so when all of those pieces are in order, our formula is still, while maybe basic might be a word for it, it still is effective because there's enough variety, and yet it still moves along at a pace that's going to make you stay engaged and excited, because those arrangements are hot and the kids are rocking. And again, our kids buy into it. Our kids know what they're good at. It fits into their wheelhouse, and they're having fun. The kids are just having fun on stage, and an audience and a judging panel can. And so if they're buying it and they're not just little trained robots doing singing and dancing like they were told to, it doesn't matter what the formula is, because they're going to sell it to an audience.
I think piggybacking off of that too, Brian, another reason why that formula works so well is because your moneymaker numbers of your opener, your ballad, and your closer, like you're gonna want almost every single kid on stage for that. So if you're planning on having a costume change, why would you put that in the first number? Why would you put that during a ballad or a closer? Like those are, place your moneymakers spread out so that you can use the other two for transitions. I think the only other formula that I'm liking these days are switching the ballad and the changer. And this is like literally new within the last couple of months. I'm on this weird kick that I'm like loving having a beautiful ballad and then just ending the show with like a kick butt closer. That's like the only modification, but most of my groups do the standard, what Brian said.
Yeah. I would say almost all of my groups do kind of that same formula-ish, if that's the word you want to use. Sometimes it depends on what the show is, like what the music is, or if they're trying to tell a certain story, or that type of thing. So it might switch up. Sometimes, like Tori said, the ballad will be 4, and then they go straight to the closer. Or sometimes I've done a couple shows where the ballad has been 2, just because it works better in that spot, and it kind of helps to interpret the idea or the story better. But yeah, I mean, I think you always want your bookends to be very good, and you want them to be very powerful. Like, everyone always talks about, closers in show choir, but honestly for me, like, I love one all hot opener. Like, it's like my favorite thing ever. I think it just really sets a really positive tone for your show. And I, as a judge, like I love when a group has just a really great opener. I think it is, you know, it really makes people like want to like lean in and engage with your group if the first thing that they see is super strong. So that's kind of like my 2 cents on that. Most of my groups are kind of in that same thing. We might get some variances here and there, depending on what the show is or if there's some sort of theme or some sort of idea they're playing with. But I agree with Tori, kind of like you're like the numbers where you get your bang for your buck are really like situated really well in those spots. So, you know, you kind of, you get your points there, and you get, you know, credit for the stuff that you're doing when your big numbers are in those spots, I think.
Yeah, and going off of what Eric said, like I think so many groups neglect having a really good attention grabber at the top of the show. Like it doesn't have to be like screaming loud in my face, but just like something interesting to draw people in and just like take their attention. I'm really liking having sort of a pre-opener almost, like a little 30-second, minute long thing, just to kind of to start it off one way and then kick into an opener. I've been seeing a lot of that lately, and I really like that. But I mean, you don't have to have that, but just think about like the way you're arranging it or the way you're staging it, like having something really cool, something that your group is good at, to just start on the right foot. Because I think that helps a lot just in the kids' performance of it too, for them to just feel like, yes, this is going well.
Yeah, I just think it really engages people in a really great way when your opener is super strong, when it grabs attention, or when you create a certain atmosphere or a certain feel. I think openers are not, I won't say they're like the lost thing in show choir, because I don't think that's true, but I think they're just very important. And I think they really can help set the tone for not just how your show is going to be, but how an audience or how a viewer is going to engage with your group. I think that's really important. Just from an entertainment aspect, how are people engaging with your kids while they're on stage?
Well, like Garrett, I saw one of your groups last year where you had like an instrumental. The combo was playing an introduction as they were walking on stage, something like that. And I was like, listening to that, what a great way to set it up, and then also you can test your levels.
Yeah. But I think in answer to your question, like, I think you're totally fine to play around with the formula and move things around and try new things. But I think what they've been talking about, that opener, change of pace, ballad, changer, closer, like that's what the judges are going to be expecting. I think that's what most people are going to be used to. And so like you just have to make sure that if you're going to do something different, like it has to be really good. Because it's sort of a risk. Like it seems weird to say, but it's kind of a risk because that's just the expectation. People are just kind of assuming like, okay, you had your ballad, now they're going to change costumes, you know? Well, if they don't do that, then you have to have a good reason why, just because that's what people are going to be looking for.
Yeah, and I not only agree with that, I also though find it refreshing when I'm speaking out of one mouth and also out of another over here. When I'm judging, I feel very refreshed when I see something that does catch me off guard in that kind of light. And so while I'm a little bit of a subscriber to the formula, I think that's maybe because I'm a little more safe and that's a little bit more my personality. So, but I secretly would always love to maybe get outside of that box a little bit, but I'm a little just apprehensive to do it. So, to what Garrett is saying, I definitely agree. I think doing something a little bit different and just subtly different is totally worth it. Totally worth it.
Any other questions out there? If not, why don't we get some final parting words of wisdom?
Oh.
You know, I do have a question, kind of piggybacking off of Andrew's question. You know, we find ourselves unique in the sense that being the only true competitive choir in Pennsylvania, we find ourselves in Massachusetts a lot, or Virginia a lot, or sometimes we'll venture into Ohio. And I get the whole programming your set to your group and your strong suits and how it works well with your group, but I'm also wanting to make sure that they're successful everywhere else we go. And not having a home, each of those areas has kind of their own unspoken expectations, or their or what they've come to want or require, based on that particular judging staff. So how do you work with that to kind of be successful in the areas that you are traveling in?
For me, I think ultimately, I think, and I'm not a director, but I know enough of them. I think that you just have to believe in what you're doing and be really confident and sound in the decisions that you've made about your show. And, no matter where you go or where, who's competing or whatever, that you feel really solid in the choices that you've made and that the programming that you've come up with, and that, no matter if you're in, Ohio or, Virginia or wherever, that you feel good about your show no matter what venue or state or wherever you are. I know as a judge, I don't know. And, Tori and Brian can piggyback on this too, but as a judge, I don't really expect a certain thing from everybody. I think you have to always have fresh eyes as possible. And just because somebody does something a different way doesn't mean that it's any less competitive or not good or whatever, your descriptors are going to be. But, and like Brian said, even when he's judging it, when you're sitting at a judging table all day, it can be such a breath of fresh air when somebody does something different. And it really is like, oh, I really enjoyed that because, I've watched some similar things for, half the day or for a quarter of the day. But just be confident in what you're doing. And I think that speaks to Tori and I as choreographers too. We never really know how anything we do is going to be received by, multiple panels of people. And, we choreograph for groups in different places that compete in different places. And so we have to feel really strongly about the work and the artistry and the creativity that we give all our groups, and hope that it, resonates with everybody wherever they go. I just think you have to kind of, make your decisions early in the process, and just, stick to your guns and do really good stuff and try your best to make it be very successful, and hope that people resonate with it, and that it is people receive it well.
Yeah, I think it would be really hard not to feel, if you're going out and competing against, I know for sure, when you go to Massachusetts, majority of the schools there love a story show, and that's what they've been doing for a long time. So I would imagine it would be really hard to not feel going to compete in a place like that. Of course you want to do that. You're competing with all the other groups that do that. I want to compete. I want to do that too. But at the end of the day, a good show is a good show, no matter what state you're in, no matter who your panel is. So just as long as you're behind it and your kids are behind it and it's done really well, it'll be well received.
Being from Nebraska and in Iowa kind of area, we have 4x4 platforms and very little, if any, staging in here, and there's just not a lot. I mean, it's pretty bare as far as any set or any additional lighting or anything like that. If I were to go down and compete in the South, where in Mississippi and Alabama, they've got huge sets that they built on, and TV screens and lighting and all the bells and whistles and anything. I would also agree with the other two in regards to there would be a sense of necessity that I would feel to have to do it. But what wins out for me is singing and dancing. Good singing is good singing, and good dancing is good dancing. And if your kids believe in the show, that will give your audience an affective experience. And as long as your audience and your judges are getting that affective feeling from what your kids are putting out there, it doesn't matter what your costumes are. It could be jeans and t-shirts. It doesn't matter what you have on that stage with you. You got to sound good. You got to look good. You got to be clean. You got to have a band that can back you up and play in tune. And as long as those things are in place and just the show is well put together, I wouldn't worry, especially if you're going to into different regions where what's going to sell well in Ohio is not necessarily going to be the same as in Massachusetts, which is not going to be the same in Illinois, you know. And so if you try to add elements of each of those places into your show so that you can compete in those different places, I think you're going to end up with something that's rather disjunct and disingenuous, maybe, because it's not true to what you believe and what you are comfortable in doing, because you're now trying to fit into somebody else's box, and I wouldn't worry about ever trying to do that.
Do you, Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely, like, I think like we said earlier, like having your brand and having your students buy into that, like you want your kids to, like, the thing that my director would always tell us, you know, was would you rather win and do their show, or would you rather get third and do your show? You know, like the kids have to prefer to do their show over winning. That being said, I think you can like hire clinicians from the areas you're going to compete to maybe give you some ideas.
A good idea.
And I think you could look for judging panels that bring in people from out of state. You know, if the panel has people from Iowa and California and, you know, Georgia, like you're going to get a different response than if it's all local people.
Yeah.
I mean, and I don't think you should, you know, try to overthink it and strategize the politics of everything. But, you know, if it's something that's a consistent problem for you, like that's maybe something you could think about is just what are the types of people that they bring in for their panel, and are they going to be interested in the kinds of stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, and that's a lot of what I've been doing. You know, our choreographers from Ohio, we had one from West Virginia, and you know, I pick up Sandy Thomas to come in and clean vocally from Virginia. So we're trying that. You know, it's you know, I'm so used to the TOB circuit where, you know, it's like there's that consistency line, but it's and I used to adjudicate, you know, for several years in that circuit, so I'm used to that. But like now seeing and seeing the varying of opinions, where a group might do extremely well here, but going here, same thing, doesn't do so well. So that's what I was just trying to figure out. I mean, and again, you know, I'm I guess a creature of habit. I mean, we're going to do what we do, you know, well and do best anyhow. But just seeing, you know, what might we consider tweaking here or there. But I do appreciate you guys, you know, for putting this on tonight, and Garrett for hosting. I think Tori, you're one of our judges at one of our competitions as well. So I do appreciate it. And we take all of that comments and those critiques and kind of work through a lot of that stuff. So we do appreciate.
Well, any final thoughts, you guys? Anything that you wanted to say, or I don't know, sage words of wisdom?
I don't have any because I'm still learning. So I feel like I've been doing this for a long time, but also it's I just like try to keep learning. I don't know. I think that's a really interesting thing. I just try to keep learning and try new things, and don't be afraid to, you know, this is from a choreographer, but, you know, don't be afraid to try something new, or, you know, something less in your comfort zone. As choreographers, we get asked to do all sorts of things often. So yeah, that's my words of wisdom. Don't be afraid to try the new stuff, but stick to your guns kind of, and do what feels good for you and your students and your program and your community. But try to branch out where you can, and, you know, be smart and ask questions and ask for help, because there's a lot of people that are willing to, you know, give you advice and give you tips and tricks that will, you know, might be of use to you.
And I echo everything that Eric says, and don't hesitate to give me a call, because I am also learning and would love to just shoot thoughts back and forth. So I'd be happy to talk to anyone anytime.
Mine is just at the end of the day, it's just show choir.
Right? Like,
All we want to do is like just teach nice humans and give these kids an amazing experience.
yeah,
Like bottom line, that's all we need to worry about. We get so caught up in the fluff, but like it's just show choir.
have fun, like live your life.